Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today I'm going over an interesting topic out of the state of Ohio with former Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown as he's reportedly weighing his next political move. Now this article written by Eleanor Mueller of the Semaphore Principles, it's an interesting conversation with former Senator Sherrod Brown, who, as the article says, is still weighing where he wants his political career to take him next, to the governor's mansion or back to the Senate. Everything is on the table. The former banking committee chair, who launched a pro-worker group earlier this year after losing his Senate seat of almost 2 decades, told Semaphore of his 2026 plans. I'm concerned about the direction of my state. I'm concerned about the direction of my country, so I don't know. He added that he's talking to family and friends as he decides whether he wants to get back in and do this. Brown expressed confidence that he'd be allowed to maintain his seniority, which determines members' opportunities if he does return to the Senate. It's historically up to leaders to decide whether returning senators can keep their standing. Sherrod Brown is a very interesting political story because in 2024, in the presidential election where Donald Trump won the state of Ohio, I believe it was by 13 points ended up being, or no, I'm sorry, it was 11.2%. President Trump won the state by a likely Republican margin. But the Senate race was a lot closer. The Republican candidate, Bernie Moreno, did end up beating the Democrat Senator Sherrod Brown by 3.6%, a lean Republican margin, in what was a very close competitive race. Bernie Moreno ended up getting about 2,857,000 votes to Sherrod Brown's 2,650,000 votes. So very, very close, and you could say roughly about a 207,000 vote difference between Moreno and Brown in a state like Ohio that's not that much or not that big of a difference in terms of votes. It was very, very close. And this is after Ohio, for the last 10 years or so, has really shifted to becoming a lot more of a reliably red state than it was in the past. In 2022, for instance, we saw J.D. Vance defeat Democrat Tim Ryan by 6.1%, a likely Republican win. Back in 2018, the last time Sherrod Brown was on the ballot, this was the Democratic-friendly midterm year in President Trump's first term. And in this one, despite the Democrat-friendly year, Sherrod Brown won by 6.8%. But still, 6.8% for Sherrod Brown in this Ohio after 2016 is still pretty impressive, as the Republican Jim Renassi only got 46.57%. Sherrod Brown got 2,358,000 votes, Renassi 2,057,000 votes. So roughly a 300,000 vote win for Brown in this election. Ohio was still a pretty competitive state. It was viewed as a toss-up state going into 2016. It had not become the reliable red state or likely Republican state that we know it as now. In 2016, the other Senate race for Rob Portman went by 20.9%. The closest fight at that time was Ohio in 2012, where Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown faced off against Republican Josh Mandel. In this race, despite being very close and having a third-party candidate in the race, Brown ended up winning by 6 points versus Josh Mandel, 50.7% for Brown to Mandel's 44.7%, with Rupert, the third-party candidate, getting 4.6%. That still ended up being a pretty competitive race. And in 2012, this is obviously when President Barack Obama ended up winning re-election against Mitt Romney, and this election saw a lot of competitive Senate races. Close races in Ohio, Democrat Joe Donnelly winning in Indiana. That had more to do with the Republican candidate, though, in that regard. Missouri, Claire McCaskill winning re-election against the Republican Todd Akin, who also was a very scandal-plagued Republican candidate. Democrat Bill Nelson winning re-election in Florida. Massachusetts, Senator Scott Brown losing to Elizabeth Warren in that election. Bob Casey in Pennsylvania winning re-election. Tammy Baldwin winning by 5.5% in 2012. Heidi Heitkamp, the Democrat, winning re-election, albeit narrowly, in North Dakota. And John Tester winning re-election by 3.7% in Montana. 2012 ended up being a very good year for the Democrats in the 2012 Senate map. Democrats won 55 Senate seats, Republicans won 45. Sherrod Brown's win in Ohio was a very big reason of winning as well as Dean Heller in Nevada by 1.2 and Jeff Flake by 3 points. Now, the last time Ohio had a Senate race was 2010, Rob Portman won by a safe margin. Back in 2006, Sherrod Brown won by 12.3% against now Republican Governor Mike DeWine by 12.3%. Before that, this seat was held by the Republican Mike DeWine. So Brown actually defeated DeWine in 2006 to flip this seat in the historically very well Democratic midterm year of 2006. And I keep using that phrase a lot for a reason. The very good Democratic midterm year. Because all indications are 2026 is supposed to be a very good midterm year in the same way that 2006 and 2018 ended up being for the Democrats, as this is going to be President Trump's midterm and his second term. The second term midterm, like 2006, ended up being very strong for the Democrats. It's possible, if the country is not doing so well in 2026, we may have a similar type election environment that we saw back then. A lot of things would have to go wrong for President Trump and the Republicans for this to happen, but it's certainly not impossible. Right now, the generic ballot shows a 2.4% Democratic national lead for the U.S. House. I would consider this a very strong night for the Democrats, but it's not really a massive Democratic wave. But Sherrod Brown was able to win tough elections before in the past, and even on the same ballot as President Trump, where he won by 11 points, Brown only lost by 3.6%. In an election year where pretty much everything went right for the Republicans in 2024. 2026 is not going to be as friendly for the Republicans at the national level. And the Senate race that's going to be up in Ohio in 2026 is going to be the Senate seat that was held by J.D. Vance before he became vice president. Now is held by Jon Husted, the lieutenant governor of the state of Ohio. Now, Jon Husted, as an incumbent Republican U.S. Senator, as a candidate, he has the endorsement of President Trump already, but he, I would argue, is not as same as, say, J.D. Vance is in the outspoken 100% loyalty to President Trump, the Make America Great Again movement, as someone like that. He's much more of a classic establishment-type Republican that votes in line with pretty much all of President Trump's policies and such in the Senate, but he doesn't really make too much noise in the media and such. Whereas on the Democratic side of things, this could open the race for a competitive race, but Husted's also not going to be very much outspoken or have any major gaffes in this race that some Republican candidates in the past in Ohio have. Now, on the Democratic side of things, I do think Sherrod Brown is the only Democrat that could potentially flip the Senate seat. Tim Ryan, the former U.S. representative, has already ruled out a run. 2 Democrats are currently in this race. Casey Weinstein, a state senator, is considering, as well as Allison Russo, former minority leader of Ohio representatives. But Sherrod Brown is honestly the only Democrat in the state of Ohio that I personally think could win a Senate race in that state. If Sherrod Brown were to enter this race and run for Senate again in 2026, whether or not he wins is very much on par with Roy Cooper running for Senate in North Carolina. It gives the Democrats an A-plus all-star tier recruit, someone that has a proven record of getting elected in the state of Ohio. You cannot have, in terms of candidate quality, a better candidate for the Democrats to put up in this race than a former U.S. Senator who ran a very close race in 2024, despite it being a very friendly Republican national environment. That's on the Senate side. On the governor's side, though, there's also the possibility that Sherrod Brown, maybe he decides he'd rather be governor of the state after being senator for so long. Amy Acton, former director of the Ohio Department of Health, is already running in this race. Tim Ryan has also expressed interest in running for governor as well. But Sherrod Brown could decide he'd rather stay closer to family and run for governor instead. The early hypothetical polling thus far has shown when Sherrod Brown is in this race, he wins by a pretty large margin in that Democratic primary. Acton trails Brown by about 39% in the most recent Bowling Green State University YouGov poll from back in April. Tim Ryan even farther behind at 16%. So Sherrod Brown, maybe he thinks he'll have an easier time at winning the governor's race than the Senate race, as usually in American elections for some reason, presidential and Senate races seem to go more towards one party, whereas governor's races seems to be more willingness to vote for the opposite party that's not usually who represents the president or Senate side of things. Maybe Sherrod Brown would have an easier time at winning that race. In this election, he would be running up against, in all likelihood, Vivek Ramaswamy, the 2024 Republican presidential nominee and close friend of President Donald Trump. So in this situation, unlike with Jon Husted, who likely won't be making a lot of media attention, he would be going up against Vivek Ramaswamy, who has a track record in 2024 of being in the media a lot and being a very vocal supporter of President Trump. If 2026 becomes the midterm election that's a referendum on the president and the president's not polling very popularly, then Vivek Ramaswamy versus Sherrod Brown could become a very close race, as Vivek is a very close ally of the president. Maybe Brown decides to do that. But in either way, it could be a very close race. For Vivek versus Amy Acton, the most recent poll from that Bowling Green State poll showed it about a 5-point race between Ramaswamy and Acton, with Ramaswamy leading. For Ramaswamy versus Sherrod Brown, that has actually not been polled at this point in time. But Ramaswamy was leading over Ryan and Acton in all these polls. The Senate race, we do have some polling, where Jon Husted is leading over Sherrod Brown but not by a massive margin. In the April poll, that Bowling Green poll, Newstead only led over Sherrod Brown by about 3%, 49 to 46, with 5% saying other. That would be around a similar margin of victory as what we saw the Senate race in the 2024 Senate race in Ohio, which suggests to me if Sherrod Brown were to run again, at minimum, it would be a very competitive race on par with what 2024 ended up being. And if, again, we have a Democratic wave on the likes of 2006 where everything's going bad, that would probably mean the economy is probably collapsed or something in regards to that nature. We're in a recession or something. The Republicans could be so unpopular come that time. Sherrod Brown winning a very close election in Ohio would not be impossible in that scenario. Now, right now, I do have this race listed as likely Republican for John Newstead to win again, but is Sherrod Brown winning in a Democratic-friendly midterm year in 2026 the most unrealistic thing out there? I don't think so. I think it's very possible. If he decides he'd rather run for governor, and again, in that same scenario, if the country's not doing well in 2026, and the Democrats are motivated in that election, would Sherrod Brown pulling an upset and defeating Vivek Ramaswamy be the hardest thing to imagine? Again, I don't think so. Again, it's all contingent on the country doing very poorly in 2026 for a state like Ohio to elect a Democratic senator or governor, but Sherrod Brown is a very special type of candidate. So he gives the Democrats a chance at winning, while other Democratic candidates may not be able to give the same amount of possibility. But this doesn't mean for sure this is going to happen. But this is a scenario that could potentially play out if things were to all go the Democrats' way for 2026. So the prospect of Sherrod Brown running again is something that's very interesting, and if Democrats could recruit him to run for the Senate race, that probably gives the Democrats a better chance. Because in all likelihood, the governor's race is probably going to go Republican no matter what for Ohio, and on the Senate race is probably going to stay Republican too. But if Sherrod Brown runs in the Senate race, this race instantly gets a lot more competitive and probably starts out at best for the Republicans as lean Republican right now, with even the possibility of going down to tilt Republican and maybe even tilt Democrat. And if Sherrod Brown could run in 2026 and find a way to upset John Newstead and win here, this gives the Democrats a viable path to potentially getting to 50 Senate seats in this regard. If they could then win Michigan, win North Carolina with Roy Cooper, and John Ossoff can win re-election in Georgia, that gets the Senate to 51-49. Flipping Susan Collins' main Senate seat then gets the Senate to 50-50. All of a sudden, blocking President Trump's agenda becomes a lot easier for the Democrats if Sherrod Brown's able to win an upset victory. Now, again, this is all a possibility. This is not what I actually think is going to happen. It's more of this is something that could potentially happen if the election national environment went so well for the Democrats and so bad for the Republicans in 2026, on par with what we saw in 2006 or 2018, which again is no guarantee. But the idea of Brown being the Democratic nominee for Ohio in 2026 is something that Democrats, I'm sure, are probably hoping to happen because it gives the Democrats a rare opportunity at contesting a Republican seat. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to leave your thoughts down below if you think what I'm saying makes sense, or if you disagree, please leave your thoughts down below as well. I want to hear what you have to think about all this. Also, make sure to hit like and subscribe as I post multiple videos every single day that you're not going to want to miss. Thank you so much for watching, and hope to see you in a future video.